A catastrophic breach occurs inside a hidden underground research complex, unleashing a deadly bioweapon that rapidly transforms all personnel into ravenous undead. A tactical response unit is deployed to investigate what went wrong at the facility known as the Hive, but the mission collapses almost immediately when the squad is ambushed. Only two members, Alice and Matt, survive the nightmare. Instead of being rescued, both are seized by the Umbrella Corporation and subjected to further experimentation involving the T-virus. Hoping to regain control of the facility, Umbrella sends in another elite team. Their attempt backfires when they accidentally release not only hordes of zombies, but also far more lethal mutated creatures called lickers. The squad is wiped out, confirming that the situation has spiraled beyond containment. Realizing the collapse of the Hive is irreversible, Umbrella secretly evacuates select VIPs, including Dr. Ashford and his young daughter Angie. During transport, however, Angie's vehicle crashes, leaving her stranded somewhere in the city. Meanwhile, the infection spreads upward from the underground lab into the streets of Raccoon City. At first, citizens believe the violence is merely a massive riot. Police officers even transport infected individuals back to the station, unaware they are already dead. One officer, Jill, quickly senses something is terribly wrong. When the detained suspects turn hostile, she eliminates them and urges everyone to evacuate immediately. Amid the growing chaos, Umbrella Executive Kane initiates a covert contingency plan centered around Alice. Picking up from the ending of the first incident, Alice awakens in a hospital and steps outside to find Raccoon City collapsing. Fires rage, bodies line the streets, and the infected roam freely. As night falls, the city becomes a war zone. To stop the outbreak from reaching the outside world, Umbrella places the entire city under full quarantine. Survivors converge at a bridge, the last possible escape route. Military personnel inspect evacuees before allowing passage. Jill and her team arrive among the desperate crowd. Suddenly, an infected civilian attacks. Officer Peyton attempts to help but is bitten. With Jill's support, another officer neutralizes the attacker. Seeing this, Kane panics. Fearing external contamination, he orders the checkpoint shut down immediately. The gates close, trapping thousands inside. Enraged civilians protest, but Umbrella forces respond mercilessly, driving everyone back into the doomed city. Raccoon City is officially abandoned. Inside the city, small groups of soldiers and police continue battling, unaware they have been sacrificed. Ammunition runs low, and defense lines collapse. Only Carlos and two teammates manage to fight their way out of the onslaught. Elsewhere, Alice enters a deserted gun shop to arm herself. While changing clothes, she suddenly collapses in pain. The T-virus inside her body reacts violently, triggering flashes of memory from her earlier experimentation and transformation. Meanwhile, Dr. Ashford begs Kane to rescue Angie. Kane coldly refuses. With no other choice, Ashford hacks into Umbrella's surveillance network and traces his daughter's location. Using the system, he begins monitoring survivors across the city and soon spots Jill's group. Jill and her companions take refuge inside a church, where they meet a lone survivor. A journalist traveling with them hopes to expose Umbrella's crimes. Strange noises echo from inside a side room. Jill investigates and finds a woman sitting silently in a chair. A priest appears, claiming she is his wife. Moments later, Jill realizes the horrifying truth. The woman is undead. The priest admits he has been secretly feeding her human remains. The restrained zombie breaks loose. Jill raises her weapon, but the priest blocks her path, only to be bitten in the neck by his own wife. Jill is forced to shoot the creature. As panic erupts, the journalist attempts to flee, but outside the church, dozens of zombies are already gathering. They slam the doors shut. Just as they catch their breath, a new threat emerges. Above them on the church roof, lickers crawl in the darkness, waiting. Overcome with fear, the lone survivor bolts from the church, unaware that lickers instinctively hunt stragglers. He barely makes it a few steps before one of the creatures pounces, tearing him apart in seconds. What makes the situation even more horrifying is that there isn't just one licker. There are several. These monsters move with terrifying speed, cling to walls like insects, and possess hides so dense that handgun rounds barely leave a mark. Even direct hits accomplish almost nothing. Within moments, Jill and the others exhaust their remaining ammunition. With no bullets left and nowhere to run, the three brace themselves for death. Suddenly, a blinding light floods in through the stained glass window. The next instant, a motorcycle smashes straight through it. Riding the bike is Alice, now visibly stronger, faster, and more lethal than before. The motorcycle slams into a licker, sending it flying across the church. Without slowing down, Alice twists the throttle, launches into a full 360-degree spin, and charges directly at the creatures. At the perfect moment, she fires a single round into the bike's fuel tank. A violent explosion erupts. One licker is instantly obliterated. The remaining creature lunges. Alice draws two submachine guns and unloads while sprinting across the room, simultaneously shooting the heavy chains holding a massive iron cross in place. The licker dodges the gunfire, but it cannot dodge gravity. The multi-ton cross crashes down, pinning the monster beneath it. The first licker, badly injured but still alive, scrambles back into the fight. Alice kicks a chair toward it, snaps up her pistol, and fires, blasting the creature backward. She then calmly walks up to the trapped licker and finishes it with a final shot. The church falls silent. Outside, the group moves quickly, passing through a foggy cemetery. Alice suddenly notices something wrong with Peyton. His wound is spreading, veins darkening beneath his skin. She raises her gun, ready to end it. Jill blocks her. Jill insists that if Peyton fully turns, she will be the one to pull the trigger. Alice reluctantly lowers her weapon. But before tensions can settle, graves around them begin to burst open. Corpses claw their way out of the ground. A zombie nearly bites the journalist, but Alice saves him at the last second. More undead rise from every direction, but ordinary zombies pose little threat compared to what they've already faced. Alice and Jill fight side by side, clearing a path and escaping the graveyard. Meanwhile, outside the city at Umbrella's Forward Command Center, analysts detect that T-virus mutation rates have reached their peak. Kane decides it is time to activate a new experiment. The Nemesis program begins. Back inside a hospital, Matt, mutated far beyond human recognition, awakens, now transformed into the towering bioweapon known as Nemesis. A helicopter descends over the city, dropping two large crates filled with heavy weapons specifically prepared for the creature. Carlos and his squad see the drop and assume Umbrella has sent them supplies. But when they reach the crates, they find them empty. Before they can react, one of their own teammates suddenly mutates and attacks Carlos. He had been bitten earlier. With no alternative, they put him down. Elsewhere, Nemesis retrieves the weapons and begins hunting Alice. His first encounter is with a group of surviving police officers positioned on a rooftop. One officer freezes at the sight of the massive figure approaching. He opens fire, but the bullets bounce harmlessly off Nemesis' armor. The creature has already locked onto him. The officers below rush to engage, unleashing everything they have. From Kane's control room, Nemesis' neural implant feeds him targeting data. Kane decides to use these officers as a live-fire demonstration. Nemesis slowly lifts a Gatling gun loaded with thousands of rounds. Seconds later, the rooftop becomes a slaughterhouse. Every officer is killed, except LJ, who survives only because he drops his weapons and collapses in terror. Nemesis scans him. Combat rating, 0. Deeming LJ irrelevant, Nemesis resumes its search for Alice. Meanwhile, Alice's group reaches a public phone and receives a call from Dr. Ashford. He offers them a deal. Help rescue his daughter Angie, and he will arrange their escape from Raccoon City. Alice has no real choice. Ashford reveals Umbrella's final plan. At dawn, the corporation intends to erase the city with a 5,000-ton nuclear strike, destroying all evidence of the hive and the outbreak. Time is running out. The group heads toward the school where Angie is believed to be hiding. While crossing a bridge, Alice suddenly feels an intense sense of danger. Peyton brushes it off. A split second later, Peyton is shot. The ambush has begun. Nemesis has found them. Alice shouts for everyone to run. Without hesitation, Alice leaps from the bridge and charges straight at Nemesis. High above, Kane monitors every movement, recording Alice's combat performance in real time. Alice advances with dual pistols blazing, but the bullets barely slow the towering monster. The moment she closes the distance, Nemesis swings a massive fist, sending her flying through the air like a ragdoll. Before Alice can fully recover, Nemesis unleashes its Gatling gun. A storm of bullets tears across the bridge. Alice dives for cover, sprinting from one piece of debris to the next as Nemesis steadily advances, forcing her backward with overwhelming firepower. She vaults over a fence, only to see a rocket streak toward her. She crashes through the window of a nearby house just as the missile detonates. A second later, Nemesis smashes through the same wall, refusing to let her escape. Alice fires while weaving through the rubble, narrowly dodging the Gatling's spinning barrels. She slides into a trash chute in a desperate counterattack, but Nemesis fires another rocket straight into the opening. The explosion blasts the chute apart. Alice barely survives by diving into a garbage truck below. Scanning the area, Nemesis detects no life signs. Assuming the target eliminated, the creature turns away and continues its hunt elsewhere. Meanwhile, Jill and the others speed toward the school. Along the road, they encounter LJ, shaken and weaponless. Despite his lack of combat ability, they bring him with them. Upon arriving, the group splits up to search for Angie. While exploring the halls, LJ runs into a zombie and nearly panics, but Carlos appears in time and saves him. Carlos reveals that he, too, has received a call from Dr. Ashford. Elsewhere, the journalist spots a small girl sitting quietly and believes she has found Angie. She is wrong. The girl suddenly attacks. Before the journalist can escape, zombies pour in from every direction. She is dragged down and brutally killed. Her dropped camera continues recording, capturing her final moments. Later, Jill finds only bloodstains and the abandoned camera. Moments later, Jill discovers Angie hiding in a classroom and rescues her. But as they try to leave, zombies flood the corridor. Then something worse appears. Zombie dogs burst into the hallway. One of the creatures leaps at Jill. She fires but misses and is slammed into the wall, stunned. The dog lunges again, and Jill prepares to fight it barehanded. Carlos's teammate arrives just in time, killing the dog with a single shot and mowing down several zombies. His relief lasts only seconds. Another zombie dog charges from behind and mauls him to death. Jill has no choice but to flee with Angie. They reach the kitchen, but two zombie dogs chase them inside. Thinking fast, Jill turns on all the gas burners. She smashes one dog away with a frying pan, grabs Angie, and runs. Jill tosses a lit match behind her. Nothing happens. The flame dies before touching the floor. Just then, Alice arrives. Without stopping, she flicks a burning cigarette into the gas-filled kitchen. A massive explosion erupts, incinerating the dogs and the pursuing zombies. When Alice looks at Angie, she immediately senses something is wrong. She grabs the girl's arm and sees dozens of injection marks. Inside Angie's backpack is a case of T-virus antidote. The truth comes out. Dr. Ashford originally created the T-virus to save Angie, who had suffered from a terminal illness since childhood. The virus regenerated damaged cells and cured her. Umbrella stole his research. They twisted it into a weapon. Carlos and LJ arrive at the school and discover the bodies of Carlos's fallen teammates. Alice notices something troubling. Carlos has been infected. Fortunately, there is still antidote left. Alice administers the cure, saving his life. As the group exits the school, Dr. Ashford calls again. He confirms Angie is safe and tells them that a helicopter is en route to City Hall, but they must secure it themselves. The call is intercepted. Kane now knows everything. Alice's team reaches City Hall and scouts the area. Carlos and Jill silently take down two guards. A hidden sniper lines up a shot on Carlos using a high-powered rifle. Just before he fires, something blocks his vision. Alice, she has already infiltrated the rooftop. Alice eliminates the sniper, rappels down the building, and swiftly dispatches the remaining guards. The helicopter is theirs. But as they prepare to board, Kane suddenly steps forward, holding Angie at gunpoint. With no way out, the group is forced to lower their weapons. Standing beside Kane are both Nemesis and Dr. Ashford. It quickly becomes clear that everything unfolding is part of Kane's grand design. He never intended to simply escape. His true objective is to capture everyone and use them as leverage, forcing Alice into another battle with Nemesis so he can determine which of the two enhanced beings is truly superior. Alice refuses to be treated as a laboratory experiment, but Kane has an insurance policy. Without hesitation, he raises his weapon and shoots Dr. Ashford. With Angie's father dying on the ground, Alice is left with no choice. She steps forward to face Nemesis. The two titans collide. Nemesis' massive frame and near-indestructible skin make him a terrifying opponent, but Alice's speed, precision, and combat mastery allow her to keep pace. Blow after blow lands. In fact, Nemesis begins to lose ground under Alice's relentless assault. Enraged, Nemesis tears a heavy slab of metal from the environment and swings it like a giant club. The sudden change in tactics overwhelms Alice. She is driven backward and smashed to the ground. Wanting a fair test, Kane tosses two weapons into the arena. Alice grabs one just in time to block a crushing strike. Armed now, she regains momentum. She disarms Nemesis, spins, and delivers a devastating kick, metal spikes piercing deep into his back. Then something changes. Alice sees flashes of Matt's past, the boy he once was. She hesitates. Nemesis hesitates too. Fragments of memory resurface inside him. Kane notices the delay and immediately orders Alice to kill Nemesis. When she refuses, Kane gives the opposite command, ordering Nemesis to kill Alice. But Kane has miscalculated. Matt's memories have fully returned. Instead of obeying, Nemesis turns his Gatling gun on Umbrella's soldiers, shredding two of them instantly, then swinging the weapon toward the rest. Alice seizes the moment, grabbing another weapon and opening fire. Carlos and Jill break free, snatch fallen guns, and join the fight. The operation spirals out of Kane's control. In desperation, Kane initiates the final protocol. Nuclear strike confirmed. Raccoon City will be annihilated in 5 minutes. Kane demands to know why the helicopter hasn't lifted off. Before anyone can answer, LJ emerges from the cockpit and punches Kane to the floor. He has taken control of the aircraft. Suddenly, two Umbrella helicopters lock onto Alice and unleash heavy fire. She sprints through the chaos, dodging bullets as walls shatter around her. Passing through a glass doorway, she finds herself surrounded by three soldiers. Alice slowly raises her hands. They think she's surrendering. They are wrong. In a flash, Alice disarms and kills all three. Hearing gunfire nearby, she rushes to help her team. She fires repeatedly at the helicopter, but its armored glass holds strong. Just as the chopper lines up a killing shot, Nemesis appears. Matt fires a rocket. The helicopter explodes midair. However, debris from the blast crashes into Nemesis. Matt collapses, mortally wounded. Alice runs to him as he dies. There is no time to grieve. Everyone boards the helicopter and takes off, leaving Kane behind. Zombies quickly swarm him. Justice, delivered by the monsters he helped create. Moments later, the nuclear missile detonates. The shockwave tears across the landscape. A massive chunk of metal hurtles toward Angie. Alice shields her with her own body. The blast sends the helicopter spiraling out of control. It crashes in the wilderness. Hours later, Umbrella recovery teams arrive. They find Alice barely alive. No other survivors are located. Soon afterward, footage recorded by reporters begins surfacing across global news outlets, evidence of Umbrella's crimes and Jill and Carlo's involvement. Umbrella responds with a massive disinformation campaign, claiming the explosion was caused by a nuclear power plant meltdown. Umbrella escapes blame. Jill and Carlos are labeled fugitives. The truth is buried. Elsewhere, Alice awakens inside a massive containment chamber. Umbrella has once again begun experimenting on her. Her memories are fragmented, her powers suppressed, but flashes of her past surge back. Alice regains everything, stronger than ever. She effortlessly kills Dr. Isaacs and several guards. Some die without Alice even touching them, collapsing from massive internal bleeding after meeting her gaze. Alice walks out of the facility. A heavily armed squad blocks her path. Suddenly, a vehicle rolls up. Inside are Carlos and Jill. They pose as high-ranking Umbrella operatives and extract Alice from the site. What they don't realize, this rescue is also part of Dr. Isaac's larger scheme. Analysis: what if the nightmare didn't stay buried underground? What if the virus didn't stop at a secret laboratory, but spilled into an entire city? Because that is where the real apocalypse begins. Resident Evil. Apocalypse doesn't ask for your patience. It doesn't warm you up. It doesn't ease you in. It throws you directly into a world that is already collapsing. The streets are empty. The buildings are burning. And death is no longer an exception. It's the new normal. This isn't a story about preventing disaster. This is a story about surviving after disaster has already won. Unlike the first film, which traps its horror inside dark corridors and underground labs, this sequel rips the doors wide open and lets the infection breathe across an entire city. The scale is bigger. The danger is deadlier. And the enemies are no longer just monsters in the shadows, they're everywhere. But the biggest change isn't the setting, it's the heroine. Alice is no longer just a survivor. She's something else now, something faster, something stronger. Something that even the corporation responsible for the nightmare no longer fully understands. Resident Evil. Apocalypse transforms the franchise from contained survival horror into full-blown urban warfare. Zombies roaming the streets. Mutated experiments stalking the survivors. And a corporate machine willing to erase an entire city just to protect its secrets. Today, we're diving deep into how this sequel expands the Resident Evil universe, why it shifted toward action-driven spectacle, what its story really says about control, evolution, and identity, and whether this explosive follow-up truly improves upon the foundation of the first film or sacrifices atmosphere for adrenaline. This is the rise of the apocalypse. This is the evolution of Alice. And this is Resident Evil: Apocalypse. Released in 2004, Resident Evil: Apocalypse arrives not as a slow continuation, but as an immediate escalation. The events of the first film haven't faded into memory. They haven't been covered up. They haven't been contained. They've multiplied. This sequel plunges us back into a world where science has crossed a line, and an unstoppable virus is now rewriting the rules of life itself. At its core, Resident Evil: Apocalypse is a fusion of three powerful genres: relentless zombie horror, high-octane action, and dystopian science fiction. The story is set in Raccoon City, a once thriving metropolis now standing on the edge of extinction. Hospitals overflow, streets are abandoned, and the dead don't stay dead. We follow Alice, a woman who wakes up alone in a ruined world, with no memory of how she got there, and no clear understanding of what has been done to her. She isn't just infected, she isn't just immune, she has been changed. Umbrella Corporation, the shadowy pharmaceutical giant responsible for the outbreak, claims it is trying to contain the situation, but their version of containment doesn't mean rescue. It means erasure. While a small group of survivors searches desperately for a way out of the city, Umbrella quietly prepares a final solution, one that leaves no witnesses, no evidence, no survivors. Resident Evil. Apocalypse is not a story about saving the world. It's a story about escaping a world that has already been sacrificed. A race against time, against monsters, against corporate lies, and against the horrifying realization that humanity itself may be evolving into something unrecognizable. This is the battlefield, this is the setting, and this is the world of Resident Evil, Apocalypse. Resident Evil, Apocalypse doesn't belong to just one genre. It exists at the crossroads, where horror meets action, where science fiction collides with survival, and where humanity slowly begins to lose its reflection in the mirror. At its surface, this is a zombie movie. The dead walk, the living run, and violence is unavoidable. But beneath the blood and gunfire, the film is telling a much darker story, a story about what happens when corporations become gods. When profit becomes more important than people, and when science advances faster than morality. One of the film's strongest themes is survival at any cost, not heroic survival, not noble survival, but desperate survival. Characters don't make choices because they're right, they make choices because they're the only ones left. Another major theme is loss of identity. Alice isn't just fighting monsters, she's fighting the question, am I still human? Or am I something manufactured? The more powerful she becomes, the further she drifts from the person she used to be. And then there's evolution, not the natural kind, not slow, not earned, but forced, injected, programmed. Umbrella doesn't see people, they see potential products, weapons, experiments, and the horror of that idea is far more disturbing than any zombie. Tonally, Apocalypse is aggressive, fast, relentless. The film rarely allows silence. Because silence would force reflection, and this world doesn't want reflection, it wants momentum. It wants chaos. It wants destruction. This tone signals a major shift for the franchise. The slow, claustrophobic dread of the first film is replaced by kinetic spectacle. Gunfire replaces whispers, explosions replace shadows, and large-scale disaster replaces intimate terror. The target audience becomes clear. This isn't purely for horror purists. This is for viewers who crave adrenaline, who enjoy stylish violence, who want monsters but also want heroes who fight back. Resident Evil, Apocalypse isn't trying to scare you quietly. It's trying to overwhelm you, because in this world, fear isn't a slow burn. Fear is a full sprint. The nightmare doesn't begin underground this time. It begins in daylight, in hospitals, in apartment buildings. In city streets where everyday life once existed, the T-virus has escaped the hive, and Raccoon City is paying the price. People fall sick within hours, hospitals overflow, emergency broadcasts loop endlessly. And then the dead begin to rise. As the city collapses, Umbrella Corporation seals its borders. No one in, no one out. Officially, they claim they are working on a solution. Unofficially, they are watching an experiment unfold. Deep inside the ruins of a hospital, Alice awakens. Naked, disoriented, alone. She doesn't remember how she got there. She doesn't remember what was done to her. But she quickly realizes something is different. Her reflexes are faster. Her strength is enhanced. Her senses are sharpened. Alice has become Umbrella's next phase of evolution. Above ground, a small group of survivors struggles through the city. Among them are civilians, rogue operatives, and people who once worked for Umbrella, people who know just how evil the corporation truly is. Their goal is simple, find a way out, before Umbrella erases everything. Meanwhile, Umbrella deploys its private military forces, not to rescue civilians, not to escort survivors, but to retrieve corporate assets, scientists. Research data, anything valuable. Everyone else is considered expendable. As infection levels spike, Umbrella releases its ultimate contingency plan, a living weapon, a towering bioengineered monster known as Nemesis. Unlike zombies, Nemesis can think, it can track, it can identify targets, and it is programmed to kill specific individuals. Alice crosses paths with the survivor group. At first, they don't trust her. She doesn't fully trust herself either. But her abilities quickly prove essential. Every encounter becomes more dangerous. Zombies swarm in massive numbers. Mutated dogs hunt in packs. Nemesis stalks from the shadows like a walking executioner. The city is no longer just infected. It is weaponized. As the survivors push toward evacuation points, they learn the truth. Umbrella never intended to save Raccoon City. The city is scheduled for nuclear sterilization. A complete wipe, anyone still inside becomes collateral damage. Time becomes the real enemy. Every minute brings the missile closer. Every delay increases the body count. And Alice begins to realize something horrifying. She is no longer just escaping the apocalypse, she is part of Umbrella's experiment, proof that their research works, which means, even if she survives, she may never be free. Resident Evil. Apocalypse turns its story into a race, not toward victory, not toward justice, but toward survival in a world already marked for death. The final moments of Resident Evil, Apocalypse, are not about victory. They're about consequence. By the time the story reaches its climax, Raccoon City is already dead. The only question left is who escapes the grave. Alice finally comes face to face with Nemesis, Umbrella's ultimate creation. A monster built from human flesh, wired with machines, and programmed to kill. At first, Nemesis appears unstoppable. Bullets barely slow him. Explosions only delay him. He is everything Umbrella wanted, a perfect weapon. But then something unexpected happens. Nemesis hesitates. For a brief moment, his programming clashes with something buried deep inside. A memory, a fragment, a human echo. Alice realizes the truth. Nemesis was once a man. A man who had a life, a name, an identity. And that realization changes everything. Instead of fighting him purely as a monster, Alice appeals to what remains of his humanity. And it works. Nemesis turns against Umbrella's orders. Not because he is free, but because part of him remembers what it means to be human. This moment becomes one of the film's most important statements. Umbrella can manipulate bodies, they can rewire brains, they can rewrite DNA. But they cannot fully erase the soul. As missiles rain down on Raccoon City, the survivors escape just in time. The city is reduced to ash. Every building, every street, every secret, erased. On the surface, it looks like Umbrella has won. No witnesses, no evidence, no city, but Alice survives, and her survival is not an accident. Umbrella recaptures her, not to imprison her, not to punish her, but to study her. Because Alice represents something far more valuable than a weapon. She is proof of concept, proof that their experiments can create something stronger than human, something faster, something better. The ending reveals a chilling truth. Alice is no longer running from Umbrella. She is the future Umbrella is trying to perfect. Symbolically, the destruction of Raccoon City represents the death of the old world, and Alice's awakening represents the birth of a new one. A world where humanity is no longer the final stage of evolution. The apocalypse didn't end with the missile strike. It evolved, and Alice is standing at the center of that evolution. Resident Evil. Apocalypse hides much of its meaning in plain sight, not through dialogue, not through exposition, but through visuals, behavior, and repetition. One of the most important visual motifs in the film is glass, windows, mirrors. Laboratory walls. Alice is constantly seen through transparent barriers, symbolizing that she exists between two worlds, human and experiment, neither side fully claiming her. Another recurring detail is reflection. Whenever Alice looks into a mirror, the camera lingers, not to show vanity, but to show uncertainty. She's not checking her appearance. She's checking her identity, asking silently, do I still recognize myself? Color grading plays a subtle role. Umbrella facilities are drenched in cold blues and sterile whites, a world without warmth, without empathy, without soul. In contrast, scenes with survivors often contain warmer tones, firelight, amber glows. Natural shadows, visually separating human emotion from corporate machinery. Nemesis itself is layered with symbolism. His exposed eye constantly shifts, sometimes glowing red, sometimes dim, representing the battle between programming and memory. When Nemesis hesitates, the camera slightly lowers its angle, making him appear less monstrous, more human. Small background details reward attentive viewers. News broadcasts mention infection rates climbing in neighboring areas. Helicopters fly overhead, even when no rescue is coming. Umbrella logos appear on almost every piece of equipment. A reminder that corporate influence is everywhere, even after civilization collapses. There are also subtle nods to the video games. Camera angles briefly mimic third-person gameplay perspectives. Certain weapon reveals mirror iconic in-game introductions, and character entrances are staged like boss encounters. Foreshadowing is woven into dialogue. Early in the film, Umbrella officers casually discuss sterilization. At first, it sounds clinical. Later, we realize it means total annihilation. The film quietly tells us the ending, long before it happens. Resident Evil. Apocalypse may appear loud on the surface, but underneath, it's carefully structured. A story about losing humanity, told through a world slowly stripped of warmth, color, and identity. Behind the explosive chaos of Resident Evil, Apocalypse, lies a surprisingly ambitious production. The filmmakers didn't want this sequel to feel small. They wanted it to feel like escalation. Bigger creatures, bigger environments, bigger action. One of the biggest challenges was bringing Nemesis to life. Instead of relying purely on computer-generated imagery, The production used heavy prosthetics and animatronic components. The actor inside the suit performed many scenes physically, giving Nemesis real weight, real presence. Real menace, this decision is one of the reasons the creature still feels tangible today. The filmmakers also leaned heavily into practical effects for zombies. Hundreds of extras were placed into detailed makeup. Each zombie was designed with a slightly different decay pattern to avoid visual repetition. Alice's physicality was a major focus. Milla Jovovich trained extensively in martial arts, firearms handling, and stunt choreography. Many of Alice's fight scenes were performed by Jovovich herself, helping create a sense of authenticity rather than relying solely on editing. The production team studied camera movements from the Resident Evil video games. Certain shots were intentionally framed to resemble gameplay perspectives, especially during action sequences and monster reveals. Another interesting detail, the film's pacing was designed to feel like a survival mission. Short bursts of calm, followed by sudden danger, mimicking how tension rises and falls in the games. Several scenes were shortened or removed to keep momentum high. Some deleted moments focused more on character backstories, but were cut to prioritize speed and action. The creative team made a conscious choice. This sequel would embrace spectacle over subtlety. Resident Evil: Apocalypse wasn't trying to be a slow-burning horror film. It was designed to feel like a cinematic adrenaline rush. A roller coaster through a dying city. Built not just to scare, but to overwhelm. Resident Evil: Apocalypse doesn't exist in isolation. It exists in conversation with its predecessor, with other zombie films, and with the entire landscape of action horror cinema. When compared to the first Resident Evil film, the difference is immediate. The original leaned into confinement, tight corridors, locked doors, claustrophobic dread. Apocalypse blows those walls apart. It trades enclosed horror for open city destruction. Mystery is replaced by momentum. Tension is replaced by velocity. Both approaches work, but they aim for very different emotional experiences. Compared to traditional zombie movies, like slow-burning survival dramas, Apocalypse feels almost rebellious. It doesn't dwell on societal collapse. It doesn't linger on despair. Instead, it weaponizes chaos. Where many zombie films focus on helplessness, Apocalypse focuses on resistance. Guns over hiding, running over waiting, fighting back over acceptance. When placed alongside action horror franchises like Underworld or Doom, Apocalypse fits comfortably into that early 2000s era of stylized violence. Dark color palettes, leather-clad heroes, industrial sound design, high-contrast lighting. It's a period piece of its cinematic generation. Within the Resident Evil franchise itself, Apocalypse represents a turning point. The moment where the series fully commits to Alice as a superpowered central figure, rather than a vulnerable survivor. Later sequels push this idea even further, but Apocalypse is where that transformation truly begins. What Apocalypse arguably does better than many competitors is creature variety. Zombies, mutated dogs, bioengineered soldiers. Each threat feels distinct. However, what it sacrifices in return is atmosphere. The slow dread of isolation is largely replaced by non-stop spectacle. Whether that trade-off works depends entirely on the viewer. If you want creeping horror, the first film may satisfy you more. If you want relentless momentum, Apocalypse delivers. Resident Evil: Apocalypse isn't trying to redefine the zombie genre. It's trying to remix it, turning horror into action, turning fear into firepower. When Resident Evil: Apocalypse hit theaters, the reaction was immediate and divided. Audiences walked in expecting zombies, monsters, explosions, stylish action, and many of them got exactly that. Fans of the video games appreciated the increased creature presence, recognizable enemies, familiar weapons, more visual nods to the source material. For a large portion of viewers, Apocalypse felt closer to the spirit of the games than the first film. But critics saw something very different. They argued that the film leaned too heavily on spectacle and not enough on substance, that characters were thin, that dialogue was minimal, that the story existed mainly to connect action sequences. To some critics, Apocalypse felt loud, shallow, repetitive, but time has a way of reshaping reputations. Years later, Apocalypse has found a solid cult following. Viewers who grew up with the film often remember it fondly. Not for its storytelling depth, but for its energy, its creatures, its unapologetic commitment to style. It occupies an interesting space, not critically celebrated, not universally dismissed, but firmly remembered. For some fans, it represents the golden era of early 2000s action horror. For others, it marks the moment the franchise drifted too far from survival horror roots. Both perspectives can be true. And that tension is exactly why Apocalypse is still discussed today. It may not be universally loved, but it is undeniably influential within its franchise, within its genre, and within a generation of genre fans. Resident Evil Apocalypse is not a quiet film. It doesn't whisper. It doesn't creep. It doesn't wait. It charges forward, with guns blazing, with monsters screaming, with a city collapsing in every direction. Its greatest strength is momentum. The film rarely slows down. Set pieces flow into each other. Action escalates constantly, and the creature designs remain some of the most memorable in the franchise. Alice's transformation into a superpowered survivor gives the series a clear identity. A central figure, a cinematic anchor. The film knows exactly what it wants to be, a high-energy action horror spectacle, and it commits fully to that identity. But that commitment comes at a cost. Character development is thin. Emotional depth is limited, and true horror atmosphere takes a backseat to explosions. If you're searching for slow-burning dread, this may not satisfy you. If you're searching for grounded realism, this may not satisfy you. But if you're searching for stylish chaos, relentless pacing, and monster-driven mayhem, Resident Evil Apocalypse delivers. This is a film for fans of action-heavy genre cinema, for viewers who enjoy dark sci-fi worlds. For those who embrace spectacle over subtlety. Final verdict, Resident Evil Apocalypse is a flawed but fiercely entertaining sequel. It doesn't try to be profound, it tries to be intense, and on those terms it succeeds. REVIEWS. The Umbrella Corporation's hidden underground facility has been compromised, allowing zombies and mutated creatures to spill out into the streets of Raccoon City. With the situation spiraling out of control, Umbrella responds by sealing off the entire city and quietly planning to erase all evidence with a nuclear strike. Caught in the middle of this chaos is Alice, along with a scattered group of survivors, all struggling to stay alive. Adding a thin layer of motivation to the carnage is Dr. Ashford, who communicates from hiding and urges Alice to help rescue his daughter, still trapped somewhere in the infected zone. On paper, expanding the outbreak from a single location to an entire city sounds like a natural evolution for the franchise. Unfortunately, the film doesn't have the technical muscle to fully sell that larger scale. A citywide apocalypse demands enormous crowds of undead, but the visual effects rarely rise to the challenge. Instead of overwhelming zombie hordes, the movie leans heavily on practical stunts and limited action setups, which makes everything feel smaller than it should. Director Alexander Witt never quite finds the rhythm needed to balance spectacle and horror, and the result feels underpowered. Another issue is how fragmented the storytelling becomes. Characters are spread all over the city, constantly cutting between groups. Bringing everyone together into a single focused mission would have created stronger momentum and a more engaging survival quest. Like its predecessor, the film struggles to establish a meaningful narrative backbone. In fact, this sequel largely abandons story in favor of non-stop gunfire, martial arts, and slow-motion acrobatics. There's certainly no shortage of action. Bullets fly, bodies fall, and Alice is portrayed as an almost unstoppable superhuman who sprints along walls, leaps over vehicles, and shrugs off injuries with ease. While this may please fans of exaggerated action, it further distances the film from anything resembling tension or fear. The heavy use of slow motion, sometimes reminiscent of a flashy music video, often turns potentially scary moments into unintentionally comedic ones. Hardcore gore enthusiasts might enjoy the frequent flesh-tearing encounters, but the camera repeatedly cuts away before things get truly nasty. The violence exists, but it rarely lingers long enough to feel disturbing. Much of the action becomes repetitive, though younger viewers will likely enjoy the constant noise, explosions, and outrageous stunt work. Milla Jovovich remains a strange presence as the lead. She's presented as tough and seductive, yet oddly hollow, making it difficult to connect with her character. In contrast, Sienna Gui stands out as a far more engaging addition, channeling a video game-inspired toughness that feels more natural and charismatic. The special effects are a mixed bag. Standard zombies look decent, and the return of the skinless dogs is welcome. Less successful is the reappearance of the grotesque pink mutant creature, which still feels artificial and awkward. The highlight among the monsters is Nemesis, a towering, heavily armed brute who stomps through scenes firing a massive gun. Any moment featuring him is wildly over the top, but undeniably entertaining. Sadly, many of the zombie sequences fall into tired territory. Graveyard eruptions, surprise attacks, and predictable jump scares feel borrowed from countless other films. The bizarre ending, which seems to set up an entirely different storyline, only adds to the sense of narrative confusion. In the end, this sequel is marginally more entertaining than the first installment, but not by much. The opening stretch offers some decent fun, presenting a familiar find shelter or die scenario reminiscent of classic zombie cinema. However, the looming nuclear strike, arguably the film's most interesting idea, is barely explored in any meaningful way. By the final act, the movie runs out of steam, piling on twists that fail to surprise or satisfy. Overall, it's a noisy, effects-driven action spectacle that delivers occasional thrills but little substance. If you're looking for mindless zombie mayhem, you'll find it here. If you're hoping for a memorable story or genuine horror, you'll probably walk away disappointed. The zombie encounters feel more impactful this time around, delivering a handful of strong action sequences that are easy to remember. One of the most noticeable additions is a towering new monster who works well as an antagonist, even if the film doesn't fully explore his potential. Milla Jovovich once again commands the screen in the lead role, effortlessly carrying the film with her physical performance and relentless energy. Watching her tear through waves of enemies remains one of the franchise's biggest pleasures. The supporting cast is an improvement over the previous installment, though none truly steal the spotlight. Where the film begins to stumble is in its familiarity. Much of what we see has been done before, and the latter half begins to feel like a recycled version of the original movie. Fans may appreciate the familiarity, but for others, it can feel repetitive. Visually, the setting evokes the dusty, isolated atmosphere of classic westerns, yet it leans heavily into action rather than mood. Compared to the first film, this sequel is more direct and faster paced. It also continues the story exactly where the previous entry ended, making it highly recommended to watch the original beforehand. That said, you don't need any knowledge of the video games to follow the story. Longtime fans, however, will recognize certain characters and references, along with some new elements that were never explored in the games. This time around, Alice isn't alone. She teams up with a small group of survivors, and there's even a character who provides occasional comic relief, something largely missing from the first film. The lighter tone is noticeable, mostly because the movie places less emphasis on deep storytelling and more on spectacle. Whether that's a positive or negative depends entirely on what you're looking for. The plot centers on Major Kane reopening the hive, which triggers a massive T-virus outbreak throughout Raccoon City. Umbrella seals the city, trapping civilians inside, and unleashes the Nemesis Project to test its effectiveness against the remaining STARS members. Meanwhile, Alice joins Jill Valentine and Carlos Oliveira in a desperate attempt to locate Angela, the missing daughter of Dr. Ashford, whose knowledge may offer a way out of the doomed city. Despite normally being skeptical of movies packed with explosions and visual effects, I found myself genuinely enjoying this sequel. It works as a non-stop thrill ride and serves as a solid continuation of the first film. The fight choreography is sharp, the female leads are impressive, and the overall experience is entertaining from start to finish. While I don't play video games myself, my children are big fans of the franchise, and after watching this, I understand the appeal. For a sequel, this 2004 entry delivers where it matters. It's energetic, engaging, and far more confident than its predecessor. Interestingly, I wasn't particularly fond of Nemesis in the games, but I appreciated the character more here due to the added context and backstory. The movie strikes a satisfying balance between character development, action, and world building. The scale of the story feels larger than before, and there's a strong sense that the atmosphere of the second and third games has influenced the film's design. Fans will notice numerous small nods and Easter eggs scattered throughout. The visual effects are also a clear step up, with improved CGI making creatures like the Lickers far more convincing. For a zombie action film, this upgrade makes a significant difference. Once again, the ensemble cast plays a big role in the film's success. Jovovich remains perfectly suited to the role of Alice, while Sienna Gui, Oded Fehr, Jard Harris, Mike Epps, and Zach Ward all contribute solid performances. If you enjoyed the first Resident Evil movie, chances are high that you'll also find this sequel entertaining. While it doesn't reinvent the genre, it embraces what it is. A loud, fast, action-heavy horror sequel designed to thrill rather than challenge, and in that regard, it succeeds. Despite having a much larger sandbox to play in this time, the film rarely feels like a true big-budget production. The most noticeable weakness lies in its story and dialogue, both of which come across as thin and underdeveloped. The escape from the city plot is padded with extra complications meant to raise the stakes, yet none of these additions feel convincing. Instead, the narrative often seems like something stitched together after the fact. This problem is reinforced by flat conversations and a near-total absence of meaningful character development. That said, if you fall squarely into the intended audience, these shortcomings may not matter much. the film delivers exactly what that demographic expects: gunfights, explosions, zombies, fistfights, and plenty of loud chaos. None of it is particularly inventive, but it's energetic enough to keep a teenage crowd entertained. As with the first entry, the concept of an all-powerful evil corporation is present but poorly explored. We're told repeatedly that the company is monstrous, yet we never truly feel its menace in the way stronger, shadow organization films manage to convey. Visually, the direction is slick and polished, but it forgets to inject genuine horror or sustained tension. Milla Jovovich handles the physical side of the role well, though brief moments of anger or emotional flashbacks don't substitute for an actual character arc. The supporting cast feels disposable. Sienna Gui fits neatly into the familiar, tough-action heroine mold seen in countless TV shows and movies, delivering competence but little personality. Mike Epps, Oded Fehr, and Sophie Vavasseur mostly go through the motions, offering nothing particularly memorable, though Epps at least shows some charm in the DVD outtakes. In the end, the film behaves exactly as expected. Loud, shallow, and largely forgettable, it certainly has an audience, and some viewers will enjoy it, but it's unlikely to convert many skeptics. The story revolves around a deadly virus spreading through Raccoon City, turning its inhabitants into flesh-hungry undead. Alice escapes captivity and eventually teams up with Jill Valentine, soldier Carlos Oliveira, journalist Terry Morales, and streetwise survivor LJ. Their only hope lies with Dr. Ashford, the scientist responsible for the virus, who promises them a way out if they can rescue his daughter. Standing in their path are hordes of zombies, corporate mercenaries, and a towering bioweapon known as Nemesis, later revealed to be Matt Addison, a survivor from the previous film who has been grotesquely transformed. The movie opens with eerie, empty city imagery reminiscent of a post-apocalyptic wasteland, before shifting into non-stop action. The pacing rarely slows, and the film blends action, suspense, light gore, and a creepy atmosphere into a constant barrage. Influences from Alien, Dawn of the Dead, and the original Resident Evil are easy to spot. The special effects, mixing practical makeup with computer-generated imagery, are generally impressive. Unfortunately, while the first film stood out as one of the better video game adaptations, this sequel marks a sharp decline in quality. It resumes shortly after the original, with Raccoon City sealed off due to the virus outbreak. Although there are a few decent twists and some solid creature designs, most of the stunts and much of the dialogue feel over the top in a bad way. Compared to classic zombie films, it lacks urgency, atmosphere, and emotional investment. Overall, this is a noisy, hollow science fiction horror sequel that trades suspense and storytelling for spectacle. While fans of the franchise may find some guilty pleasure in it, it ultimately stands as a disappointing follow-up rather than a worthy continuation. Picking up right after the events of the first Resident Evil, Apocalypse throws us back into the chaos as Alice, a former Umbrella employee turned hardened survivor, wakes to discover that the deadly T-virus has escaped from the underground hive and spread into the streets of Raccoon City. The infection reanimates the dead, turning the population into flesh-hungry monsters, while Umbrella seals off the city and prepares to wipe it off the map with a nuclear strike. Alice's only hope lies in teaming up with a small band of survivors and tracking down the daughter of an Umbrella scientist who claims he can get them out. Making matters worse, a hulking bioweapon called Nemesis, armed to the teeth and seemingly unstoppable, is roaming the city. Sometimes it takes me longer to write about a movie than it does to sit through it, but that's rarely the case with the Resident Evil series. These films aim squarely at being loud, fast, and brainless fun, and for the most part, they succeed. Apocalypse delivers plenty of the expected ingredients: waves of zombies, over-the-top action, Milla Jovovich looking fierce while unloading heavy weaponry, and the welcome addition of Jill Valentine, a tough and attractive cop who quickly becomes a standout. Add in mutant creatures, exploding buildings, martial arts-style combat, zombie dogs, and flashy effects, and you have a recipe for uncomplicated entertainment. That said, I went in with modest expectations and still felt a little underwhelmed. For a horror film, it rarely manages to be genuinely frightening. The setting, a quarantined city drowning in infection, should be terrifying, but the movie mostly favors spectacle over suspense. We're told that anyone bitten will quickly die and return as one of the undead, yet the sense of dread never quite settles in. Alongside Alice, we follow two police officers and a reporter who are trapped inside the city. After crossing paths with her, they receive a call from a scientist offering escape in exchange for rescuing his missing daughter. On their journey, they encounter a disgruntled former Umbrella operative who was left behind, as well as a civilian character clearly intended for comic relief. Beyond standard zombies, we get infected dogs and the monstrous Nemesis, who appears to be a twisted counterpart to Alice, another product of Umbrella's experiments. While the movie isn't particularly good, it isn't entirely without value either. Sienna Gui does a solid job as Jill Valentine, bringing some energy and presence to the role. A few comedic moments land, including a darkly humorous scene involving a distracted driver and a pair of undead street workers. However, the ending feels more like a commercial for the next sequel than a satisfying conclusion. Since I haven't played the video games, I can't judge how faithful the movie is to its source material or how accurate the character portrayals are. What I can say is that this isn't a film I'd recommend purchasing. Still, if it happens to be on television and you're in the mood for noisy, disposable action, it can kill a couple of hours. I generally enjoy many kinds of movies and often find myself fascinated by the craft behind them. But I have a personal rule. If a film doesn't grab me within the first 20 minutes, it probably won't win me over later. In this case, not having seen the original movie beforehand left me confused during the opening stretch, and the film doesn't do much to catch newcomers up. As a result, I struggled to feel invested. At its core, Apocalypse is a straightforward monster movie. People get chased, people get bitten, people get shot, and some of them come back anyway. There are bizarre medical experiments, mysterious tanks filled with liquid, and the occasional odd visual choice that feels more distracting than meaningful. Milla Jovovich remains likable as Alice, even when the material around her isn't doing her any favors. After Alice escapes the hive in the first film, she wanders into a city already collapsing under the weight of Umbrella's mistakes. The corporation simply locks the gates and lets everyone fend for themselves. Interestingly, I didn't care much for the original movie on my first viewing, but it grew on me the second time around. Unfortunately, Apocalypse never quite reaches that level. It's louder, bigger, and more action-driven, but also thinner in atmosphere and tension. In the end, Resident Evil. Apocalypse is disposable genre fare, neither offensively bad nor particularly memorable. It delivers explosions, monsters, and gunfire in abundance, but forgets that horror works best when it also makes you uneasy. If you're already a fan of the franchise, you'll probably find something to enjoy. If not, you're not missing anything essential. This sequel grabbed my interest right away. Yes, not a great deal actually happens, and it certainly has its share of imperfections, but judged by sequel standards, it's surprisingly solid. Film franchises rarely deliver a truly outstanding second chapter, so expectations should always be kept in check. While it's tempting to compare the directing styles of Alexander Witt and Paul W.S. Anderson, the fact remains that Anderson still penned the script even though he handed directing duties to Witt, who at the time was relatively inexperienced. That said, Witt manages to hold his own and, more importantly, preserves the look and feel of the original, allowing both films to flow together naturally. I appreciated the small nods to other pop culture properties, such as the cheeky 10 points remark and the familiar finish him line, which feel like playful winks rather than cheap gimmicks. The Nemesis stands out as an imposing antagonist, slightly different from its video game counterpart, but intimidating nonetheless. Turning him into a dark mirror of Alice was a smart narrative choice and gives their confrontations extra weight. The inclusion of the infected dogs was also a welcome touch, staying closer to the games, where they're famously irritating in the best possible way. Zombie movement is another area where the film succeeds. The undead shamble and lurch in a way that feels classic, evoking the old-school style many modern films tend to ignore. It's refreshing to see a sequel that respects this tradition, especially considering the long creative lineage behind it, from classic zombie cinema to modern survival horror gaming. One aspect I didn't enjoy was the hyperactive camera work and rapid movement of the characters. Action frequently unfolds so quickly that it becomes difficult to follow, which undercuts the impact of certain sequences. The first film didn't rely on this technique as heavily, making the stylistic shift feel somewhat odd. It gives the movie an action-first rhythm rather than a horror-focused one. Milla Jovovich's return as Alice is essential, and her presence alone will satisfy many fans. The introduction of Jill Valentine is also a big win, particularly due to how faithfully her outfit mirrors the games, though the casting itself doesn't perfectly match the character's look. Still, the effort to honor the source material is evident. Overall, I stand behind this sequel. While I suspect Anderson might have delivered a slightly stronger follow-up had he stayed in the director's chair, that's a minor gripe. What we get instead is a fun, stylish continuation that works well as a bridge between the first and third installments. Revisiting the original film after 2 decades reminded me that it's entertaining, even if not entirely fulfilling. That rewatch pushed me to finally explore the rest of the series, and this second entry wastes no time making its intentions clear. It doubles down on loud, flashy action horror. Subtlety is tossed aside in favor of explosive set pieces, graphic violence, and relentless momentum. From Jill Valentine's boldly impractical outfit, to the strong echoes of dystopian action classics, to the unapologetic brutality and endless waves of zombies, the film embraces excess. Even without Anderson in the director's chair, his creative fingerprints are unmistakable. Witt clearly models the film's style after Anderson's slick and cool approach, pushing it even further into over-the-top territory. This sequel is more brazen, more indulgent, and far less restrained than its predecessor. Dialogue is blunt, characterization is minimal, and quieter scenes exist only as brief pauses before the next action surge. It may lack elegance or depth, but it knows exactly what kind of movie it wants to be and commits fully to delivering that experience. From the very beginning, the film never pretends to be something it isn't, and in that sense, it's at least honest. Even at its loudest and most excessive, the stunts, practical effects, and action set pieces look impressive. The bloodshed, creature makeup, and enhanced visuals are slicker and more polished than earlier entries, giving the spectacle a sharper edge. Milla Jovovich fully settles into her status as an action lead here, and supporting players like Sienna Gui pull their weight as well. Simply put, if you're looking for action-heavy horror, that's exactly what you're getting. That said, certain creative choices are questionable. Transforming Nemesis from a terrifying, hulking nightmare into something closer to a stylized comic book figure strips away much of his menace. Still, this change fits the broader tone of the movie, which leans heavily into flashy excess. The film barrels forward at such a relentless pace, with every moment engineered to push the heroes along, that it stretches believability far past its breaking point. But given the franchise's roots in video games, this exaggerated style almost feels expected. Where the movie truly falters is in its writing. Potentially interesting ideas, like the unchecked power of the Umbrella Corporation and its corporate corruption, are reduced to background noise. Dialogue is often clumsy, and many scenes feel hastily assembled. The script exists mainly to string together action sequences and inch the larger storyline forward, offering little beyond the bare minimum. To be fair, that may be all the filmmakers intended. As entertainment, the film is watchable, but in a strangely detached way. It wants so badly to be stylish and edgy that much of its intensity ends up feeling hollow. Despite the constant violence and grim imagery, there's little emotional weight behind it. The action looks fierce, but it rarely feels meaningful. The lack of real stakes makes it hard to become invested in what's happening on screen. The final stretch, particularly after the major events in Raccoon City, feels rushed and clearly designed to set up the next installment. Unfortunately, it's also the weakest portion of the movie, introducing new ideas without giving them proper development. By the time the credits roll, the experience feels incomplete, as though the ending exists more as a placeholder than a conclusion. More than its predecessor, this entry works best as background viewing, something you can half-watch without paying close attention. It delivers familiar flavors but never quite satisfies. Fans of the franchise, the cast, or the genre will likely find enough here to justify a viewing, especially if they're committed to following the series. Still, even within the action horror category, there are stronger and more engaging options available. Interestingly, this installment seems to pack in more action than all the earlier films combined. Yet more action doesn't automatically translate to a better movie. The story borrows characters and plot elements from the games, but on closer inspection, much of it falls apart. The idea of a powerful organization sealing off an entire city just to wipe out humanity raises obvious questions. Why don't civilians fight back? Why are basic military tactics and heavy weapons seemingly non-existent? These gaps become more noticeable on repeat viewings. There's also the familiar problem of Umbrella creating yet another superpowered creature simply to eliminate strong survivors, a concept that feels more convenient than convincing. On first watch, it's easy to gloss over these issues and focus solely on the explosions and monster fights, but compared to modern action spectacles, the thrills now feel relatively tame. The core setup follows Alice as she teams up with other survivors in a desperate attempt to escape a zombie-ravaged Raccoon City while searching for a young girl who may hold the key to stopping the outbreak. On a surface level, it's fast, loud, and energetic, and in those terms it succeeds. Ultimately, this is a loud, glossy, shallow ride. It can be fun in the moment, especially if you're in the mood for brainless action horror, but it doesn't linger in the mind or offer much substance. Enjoy it for what it is, just don't expect it to be more than that. One of the film's strongest qualities is its relentless, high-octane action, which dominates nearly every minute of screen time. Rather than leaning into traditional horror pacing, the movie feels far more like a full-throttle action spectacle. From the opening moments onward, viewers are thrown into a nonstop barrage of gunfire, chases, brutal fights, and explosive encounters. The momentum rarely slows, creating an experience that feels more like an extended combat sequence than a conventional monster movie. Early set pieces establish this aggressive tempo, including the chaotic evacuation attempt from the city, military clashes with infected creatures along burning streets, and desperate standoffs inside abandoned buildings. As the story pushes forward, the scale of destruction increases, delivering even larger and louder action sequences. Highlights include a ferocious confrontation with a towering mutant armed with heavy weaponry, a frantic struggle against mutated dogs inside a school, and an intense assault on a helipad that erupts into a storm of hand-to-hand combat and continuous gunfire. The latter portion of the film, in particular, piles on spectacle after spectacle, rarely allowing the audience to catch its breath. This constant motion allows the special effects to shine, showcasing hordes of zombies and grotesque mutants while also indulging in generous amounts of bloodshed. For fans of visceral visuals and exaggerated monster designs, there is plenty to appreciate. However, the finale feels less satisfying, as it tries too hard to hint at larger conspiracies and future storylines, instead of focusing on resolving the current narrative. These teases seem designed more to set up sequels than to give this chapter a meaningful conclusion. Even so, the sheer entertainment value of the action keeps the film engaging overall. The story unfolds before the events of the first installment, as a deadly heat wave grips Raccoon City. Soon after, the audience realizes that this sequel operates quite differently from its predecessor. Aside from a few returning characters, it barely feels connected, a shift that may be explained by the change in director. While the original filmmaker steps back into a writing and producing role, direction duties are handed to someone with a background more rooted in lighter genres, and that tonal shift is noticeable. The narrative picks up with Alice, a lone survivor who finds herself trapped in a city overrun by the undead after a viral outbreak linked to a secret underground laboratory known as the Hive, controlled by the shadowy Umbrella Corporation. As a result of forced experimentation, Alice has become enhanced with superhuman strength, speed, and reflexes, turning her into a near-invincible warrior. Another familiar figure enters the story in the form of Jill Valentine, a capable fighter who understands exactly how to deal with zombies, yet often hesitates in emotionally charged situations. Unfortunately, character depth is one of the film's weakest areas. Most supporting figures appear briefly, introduce themselves, and are quickly killed off, leaving little room for audience investment. Their lack of development makes it difficult to care about their fates. The action choreography also suffers at times due to questionable execution. Some stunts look artificial, and the heavy use of camera tricks, such as gravity-defying leaps and awkward wire work, can feel more distracting than impressive. Attempts to mimic video game-style movement occasionally come across as unintentionally comedic. Alice's dramatic reentrance, which involves crashing a motorcycle through a church window for no clear reason, further emphasizes the film's preference for style over logic. The camera frequently tracks bullets in slow motion, exaggerating every kill and emphasizing spectacle above storytelling. Scenes featuring resurrected corpses, over-the-top combat, and repeated one-liners reinforce the film's exaggerated tone. While humor occasionally lightens the mood, it is often recycled and sometimes tests the audience's patience. In the end, the movie fully embraces excess. Logic, subtlety, and emotional depth are sacrificed in favor of explosive visuals and nonstop chaos. For viewers seeking thoughtful horror, it may disappoint, but for those craving a loud, fast, and unapologetically outrageous action experience, it largely delivers. One of the more telling elements of the sequel is how the protagonist's personality shift mirrors the thinness of the script itself. Alice, once hesitant and grounded, suddenly adopts the stance of a full-blown action icon, transformed into an unstoppable killing force. Whether this change is meant to be explained by scientific tampering or simply reflects the director's inability to guide character development is open to debate. Either way, the transition feels abrupt and unearned. Equally baffling is the handling of Nemesis. In the source material, he stands as a towering embodiment of terror, yet here he is reimagined as a strangely emotional and almost tragic figure. This softening drains much of his menace, turning a once iconic monster into something far less imposing. The setting also undergoes a major shift. Rather than confining events to shadowy hallways and underground labs, the story expands outward into the streets of Raccoon City. Churches, schools, cemeteries, and ruined neighborhoods replace sterile corridors, offering a broader visual palette. The premise suggests that umbrella scientists reopen the hive to investigate what occurred, inadvertently unleashing hordes of infected into the city. From that moment on, chaos spreads unchecked. This new urban backdrop does provide some visual benefits. Costume design becomes more varied, replacing endless lab coats with a wider range of civilians, soldiers, and grotesque creatures. The inclusion of infected children adds an extra layer of grimness, hinting at the scale of the catastrophe. Unfortunately, these elements highlight a deeper narrative problem: the film's complete lack of logical consistency. Newspaper headlines speak of mysterious illnesses and violent attacks, but if thousands of zombies poured out of a single underground facility, how could such an event go unnoticed or uncontained? Why does Umbrella, the very company responsible, appear to make no meaningful effort to stop the outbreak at its source? These unanswered questions repeatedly shatter immersion. The film demands an excessive level of disbelief. Characters wander off alone despite overwhelming evidence that isolation equals death. Predictably, these solo excursions end with sudden ambushes and disposable fatalities. One begins to wonder how many casualties are required before anyone learns basic survival instincts. The screenplay embraces a fast food approach to storytelling, quick, noisy, and superficial. Characters appear without explanation, encounters lack context, and nearly every scene exists primarily to justify another round of gunfire, explosions, or fistfights. The relentless pace becomes exhausting rather than exciting. While the sequel maintains roughly the same quality level as its predecessor, it leans even further into action at the expense of horror. Stylized shootouts, frantic chases, and chaotic battles dominate the runtime, leaving little room for atmosphere or tension. The heavy use of tight close-ups and rapid editing makes many action sequences visually confusing, robbing them of impact. The more restrained camera style of the first film is replaced by a hyperactive approach that prioritizes movement over clarity. On the positive side, makeup effects show improvement, with zombies appearing more detailed and injuries more convincing. The increased budget is noticeable in several areas of production design. Alexander Witt, stepping into the director's chair after working on numerous high-profile projects, injects a more aggressive energy into the proceedings. Unfortunately, energy alone cannot compensate for poor visual staging. The action may be constant, but it is rarely coherent, resulting in a film that is loud, busy, and ultimately hollow. The climactic showdown feels misguided and oddly pointless, weighed down by excessive and almost laughable sentimentality. One of the rare darkly humorous moments comes from the demise of an especially irritating character, the journalist who obsessively documents everything. His camera continues rolling even as he's swarmed by a pack of young zombies, capturing his fate in grotesque detail. The way the massive corporation attempts to bury the truth behind the catastrophe is one of the script's few genuinely clever touches, though it hardly excuses the film's larger problems. The conclusion, which avoids offering a true sense of closure, instead leaves viewers with lingering uncertainty, an approach that may intrigue some, but frustrates others. A major issue with the film is its overcrowded threat roster. Beyond the expected flesh-eating undead, the protagonists must also deal with mutated beasts, infected animals, and the looming presence of the mysterious nemesis, whose arrival was teased previously. The result is a chaotic blend of influences, borrowing heavily from various action and sci-fi properties. While the creatures are faster and more aggressive this time around, the mashup approach lacks cohesion. In its effort to secure a softer content rating and reach a broader audience, the movie makes a familiar mistake within modern horror, replacing sustained tension with sudden jolts. Unfortunately, it also forgets that shock-based horror still needs visual impact. Many character deaths are suggested rather than shown, conveyed through quick zooms, muffled screams, or fleeting close-ups of gnashing teeth. Add in frantic editing, shaky camera work, and constant motion blur, and even the creature makeup becomes difficult to appreciate. For longtime fans, this restraint leads to disappointment rather than suspense. That said, the film isn't without highlights. A visually impressive nuclear detonation stands out, as does an unsettling sequence involving infected children. There's also an attempt to comment on how media outlets manipulate information, but the message is handled so bluntly that it loses much of its potential power. The story ultimately spends a considerable amount of time setting the stage for the next installment, instead of delivering a fully satisfying arc of its own. Still, the filmmakers assemble roughly 90 minutes of relentless action, rarely letting the pace slow. The devastated city becomes a relentless battleground, reshaped by a deadly virus that turns its victims into bloodthirsty predators. The rule is simple: avoid being bitten at all costs. The closing moments make it clear that another chapter is inevitable. As long as audiences keep showing up and the franchise remains profitable, this bleak saga will continue. This is not a film for the faint-hearted. One common pitfall with sequels is that they often assume viewers are fully familiar with the original. Thankfully, this movie opens with a brief recap, ensuring newcomers aren't lost before plunging into an even larger crisis involving a fresh collection of survivors. The story then picks up where its predecessor left off and quickly accelerates into full throttle. The returning heroine once again takes center stage as a fierce, acrobatic, weapon-savvy warrior, and the screenplay sprinkles in new twists surrounding her past. Louder, more violent, and more frantic than the first film, this sequel embraces excess with explosive action, striking visuals, and a lineup of bold personalities. While the plot leans on a well-worn survival and rescue framework familiar to fans of apocalyptic cinema, it compensates by introducing a group of proactive, capable heroes, an element often missing from formula-driven horror outings. The result is a sequel that may stumble in execution, but still delivers a high-energy ride for fans of action-heavy monster mayhem. In many ways, more heroes manage to make it out alive in Resident Evil Apocalypse than they ever did in its predecessor, Resident Evil. While the original film was largely confined to the shadowy underground corridors of the Hive, this sequel boldly shifts the chaos to street level, placing the nightmare in familiar urban surroundings. That change alone heightens the tension, making the horror feel closer and more personal. Once the T-virus escapes, Raccoon City spirals into complete collapse. One particularly disturbing moment shows a desperate priest attempting to restrain a zombified woman, tying her to a chair and feeding her human remains in a tragic attempt to save her soul. Scenes like this highlight the film's darker edge and willingness to push uncomfortable imagery. Taking over directing duties is Alexander Witt, a veteran second-unit action director known for handling large-scale set pieces. His experience shows, as the action here feels bigger, faster, and more relentless. Meanwhile, original director Paul W.S. Anderson steps back from the chair, but remains heavily involved in shaping the story. Just like the first film, Apocalypse delivers a clear message about unchecked corporate power. The Umbrella Corporation's underground experiments go horribly wrong, unleashing a virus that kills its victims and then resurrects them as ravenous undead. Raccoon City, built directly above the Hive, becomes ground zero for disaster. Compared scene for scene, Apocalypse feels more intense than the original. The infected attack dogs look more vicious, the set pieces are grander, and the body count rises quickly. However, the newest bioweapon, Nemesis, a towering, hulking enforcer, feels slightly uninspired in design, resembling a monstrous brute rather than something truly nightmarish. As panic spreads, Umbrella seals off the city, blocking all escape routes and preparing to erase the entire area with a nuclear strike. Their goal is simple: hide their failure and eliminate witnesses. Trapped inside are elite cop Jill Valentine, Umbrella soldier Carlos Oliveira, and streetwise survivor LJ, each fighting with limited resources against impossible odds. They soon cross paths with Alice, now genetically enhanced after Umbrella's experiments. A desperate scientist, Dr. Ashford, contacts them from outside the quarantine zone, promising a safe exit if they can locate his missing daughter, Angie. This deal pushes the group deeper into the city, where danger lurks around every corner. Unlike the first movie, Apocalypse doesn't rely solely on zombies. The script expands on the nature of the T-virus and introduces new mutations, while frequently allowing the heroes to pull off outrageous, near-impossible stunts. The pacing is relentless, almost breathless, with barely a moment to slow down. The gunfights, explosions, and monster encounters come one after another, creating a non-stop adrenaline rush. Watching Jill and Alice mow down hordes of infected with oversized weaponry is undeniably entertaining, even if it stretches believability to cartoonish extremes. It's absurd, over-the-top, and completely aware of what it is. For a first-time director, Witt handles the spectacle impressively, staging chaotic battles with confidence and splashing in just enough blood and gore to satisfy horror fans. Anyone who enjoyed the first Resident Evil will likely find plenty here to like. The story begins when Umbrella reopens the Hive in an attempt to investigate the original outbreak. Instead, they accidentally trigger an even greater catastrophe, releasing the virus into Raccoon City. Within hours, the streets are flooded with zombies and grotesque mutations, while massive barricades trap survivors inside. Jill Valentine, her partner Peyton Wells, and reporter Terry Morales find themselves stranded when Umbrella seals the city. With ammo running low and enemies everywhere, survival becomes their only objective. They eventually align with Alice and accept Dr. Ashford's bargain to search for Angie in exchange for escape. This international co-production delivers solid action horror entertainment, but it never reaches its full potential. Based on the popular video game series, the film moves at lightning speed, which is exciting but also problematic. Character development is almost non-existent. Most people are defined only by their job titles and little else. There are also logical gaps, such as how Umbrella manages to construct a massive wall around an entire city in such a short time. The script wisely ignores these questions, but they're hard to overlook. Overall, Apocalypse is loud, fast, and chaotic fun. It may lack emotional depth and narrative polish, but as a pure action horror ride, it delivers exactly what it promises. Relentless carnage, stylish mayhem, and a city-sized nightmare. The central concept here is actually quite solid. I've always enjoyed the idea of a small group of ordinary people struggling to survive against overwhelming numbers of flesh-hungry zombies, using only their instincts, resourcefulness, and whatever weapons they can scavenge. It strongly echoes the spirit of classic zombie cinema, and since the movie is adapted from a video game built entirely around survival and zombie slaughter, the potential for an intense horror action experience is obvious. That's why it's so frustrating that the film plays things so safely when it comes to violence. While I appreciate the fast pace, stylish visuals, and energetic direction, I was extremely disappointed by how restrained the bloodshed is. This might be one of the tamest zombie movies I've ever seen. The setup screams for brutal headshots, graphic dismemberment, and visceral chaos, yet the filmmakers seem determined to avoid showing much of anything. Considering how many opportunities exist for gruesome moments, the lack of gore feels like a massive missed opportunity. Even more baffling is the way zombies gradually fade into the background halfway through the movie. For a story centered on an undead outbreak, the creatures themselves become strangely sidelined, which seriously weakens the tension. The ending doesn't help either. It feels confusing, incomplete, and more like the beginning of a new storyline than a proper conclusion. From a technical standpoint, the director does a respectable job keeping the momentum going. The film is rarely boring, and there are plenty of entertaining set pieces. High-speed motorcycle mayhem, rooftop chases, massive explosions, monster battles, gunfights, and even an attack involving an infected dog. All of this spectacle is enjoyable, but without impactful violence, it never reaches its full potential. Had the filmmakers embraced a more aggressive, no-holds-barred approach, this could have been a standout entry in the zombie genre. Instead, it settles into mediocrity, competent, watchable, but largely forgettable. The restrictive approach is especially strange given the film's adult rating. What we actually get amounts to a handful of bloodless gunshot wounds, some martial arts scuffles, mild bite marks, and a couple of severed hands. That's hardly extreme content for a zombie movie. One can't help but wonder why the filmmakers didn't lean into the carnage. Visually, the movie does have atmosphere. The dark environments work well, and there are a few standout moments, such as a school filled with infected children, that briefly capture the eerie tone the film should have maintained throughout. I also have to mention Jill Valentine's outfit, stylish, tough, and undeniably cool. It may resemble a certain famous video game adventurer's look, but it fits the character and leaves a strong impression. With a sizable budget, the production values are solid, and the locations give the movie a familiar look to other modern zombie films. The special effects are generally convincing, and the monstrous nemesis creature is suitably intimidating. Performances are decent across the board, and while no one delivers anything groundbreaking, the cast is serviceable and charismatic enough. This sequel improves on its predecessor in terms of pacing and action, and the handling of mutants and undead is more polished. However, despite all these strengths, the film suffers from a hollow core. For nearly the first half hour, there isn't much of a story, just character introductions and scattered action. When the plot finally emerges, focusing on a group attempting to escape the city by locating a scientist's missing daughter, it feels too late to fully invest emotionally. In the end, this could have been an excellent zombie action film if it had fully committed to its darker instincts. Instead, it comes across as oddly sanitized and surprisingly cautious, enjoyable in the moment, but not especially memorable. Good but far from great. The shadowy corporation pulling the strings has its own agenda, and before long the story turns into a three-sided conflict between the heroes, the company, and the monsters themselves. If the screenplay had offered a bit more depth, we might have been talking about something truly memorable. Having watched the original Resident Evil countless times and being genuinely excited for the sequel, I finally caught this follow-up, on opening night no less. I already knew that Paul W.S. Anderson, the director of the first film, wasn't returning to the director's chair, as he was busy with his passion project, Alien vs. Predator. Normally, I'm fine with creative shakeups, as long as they don't derail the experience. In this case, though, it's hard to say where things went wrong. The half-hearted scares and underwhelming shock moments might stem from Anderson's script, or perhaps they fall on the shoulders of new director Alexander Witt, who is making his feature debut. One thing I appreciated right away: the sequel picks up exactly where the first film ended, even rewinding briefly to show what happened before Alice wakes up. That continuity, and the ominous setup from the previous finale, was one of the strongest elements carried forward. The story itself is serviceable, about as solid as you'd expect given the writer. Pacing certainly isn't an issue. In fact, the movie moves so relentlessly that it never gives the audience a chance to breathe. Unfortunately, this constant motion becomes a problem. Action, no matter how flashy, benefits from quieter moments, dialogue, character beats, or simple pauses that allow tension to build. Without those buffers, the non-stop explosions and gunfire start to feel repetitive rather than thrilling. The filmmakers cram action into nearly every second, and instead of excitement, it often produces fatigue. Adding to this, the camera frequently blurs whenever large groups of zombies appear, seemingly to disguise weak makeup effects. Ironically, while the first film leaned heavily into stylized makeup, this sequel feels oddly underdressed in that department. Performances are fine across the board. Milla Jovovich once again delivers a confident and capable turn, and the supporting cast does what's required of them. Most characters, however, fall squarely into familiar stereotypes. The reckless reporter chasing a story at any cost, the tough cop who bends the rules but takes the job seriously, and the bumbling side character meant for laughs. Surprisingly, the comic relief actually works this time, which is more than can be said for many similar films. Visually, the effects are competent but rarely impressive. The action sequences are energetic yet excessively exaggerated. Encounters involving the nemesis swing wildly between genuinely exciting and unintentionally amusing. The creature itself feels both overused and underdeveloped, constantly present, yet never explored in a meaningful way. Cinematography is functional but unremarkable. The film also introduces far too many characters, most of whom exist only to be quickly dispatched by zombies or the nemesis. The final confrontation between Alice and her monstrous opponent feels awkwardly staged, resembling a cutscene from a video game. While I enjoy video games, I'd rather play them than watch a movie imitate one so closely. On the audio side, the film is loud and aggressive, though not quite as ear-splitting as its predecessor. Thankfully, the soundtrack moves away from the non-stop heavy metal assault of the first movie, offering a bit more variety. In the end, this is a reasonably entertaining sequel, but a very forgettable one. It holds your attention while it's on, yet fades from memory almost immediately afterward. If you enjoyed the first film, like the cast, or simply want a fast-paced distraction for an hour and a half, it's worth checking out. Just don't expect it to linger in your thoughts once the credits roll. I would mostly recommend this sequel to devoted fans of the original film or admirers of Milla Jovovich, those who genuinely enjoy Paul W.S. Anderson's style will probably find something to like here as well. Viewers who appreciated the first installment will likely feel comfortable with this follow-up, though many may sense a slight decline in quality, particularly in the directing. That said, it's not a terrible movie, especially when you consider that it's continuing a franchise that never set the bar very high to begin with. The film blends horror, action, and science fiction in a reasonably entertaining way, yet it stumbles with some questionable storytelling decisions. Its biggest flaw is an overabundance of plot threads and side characters who don't always feel meaningfully connected. Surprisingly, during large portions of the first half, Alice herself barely feels like the central focus. While this doesn't necessarily make the film incomprehensible, it does leave it feeling oddly scattered and occasionally awkward. There are stretches where the narrative lacks momentum, and despite the story's potential, several strange choices undermine its impact. The action scenes can be fun, and as a zombie-centric movie, it delivers enough chaos to satisfy genre fans. However, the production sometimes slips into an unmistakable B-movie vibe. Performances are uneven, and some casting decisions feel misguided. Dialogue often comes across as stiff or clumsy, and the editing, particularly the overuse of slow motion, can be distracting. The film also borrows heavily from other, more successful movies, which further diminishes its sense of originality. Still, a few elements stand out in a positive way. The Nemesis character, for instance, is an imposing and visually striking antagonist, armed to the teeth and memorable in presence. With a stronger creative team behind the camera, this sequel might have reached much higher heights. The groundwork for something better is clearly there, but it never quite realizes its full potential. Like many video game adaptations, this movie thrives on spectacle rather than depth. Picking up after the events of the first film, Alice once again emerges as a lone survivor, now altered by secret experiments that leave her far more resilient than before. She awakens in a raccoon city that has collapsed into chaos, effectively transformed into a militarized quarantine zone crawling with the undead. Nearly unstoppable, Alice soon joins forces with a mismatched group of survivors who are desperately trying to escape before the city is erased entirely. Among this group are hardened soldiers and police officers, including the fierce and capable Jill Valentine, whose fearless attitude and heavy firepower make her a standout. They're joined by Carlos Oliveira, Valentine's partner Peyton Wells, determined reporter Terry Morales, and the streetwise LJ, who provides much-needed comic relief. Together, they're approached by Dr. Ashford, a wheelchair-bound scientist with a personal stake in the outbreak. He offers them a chance at escape in exchange for rescuing his missing daughter, who is trapped somewhere inside the doomed city. From that point forward, the movie barely pauses for breath. The pacing is relentless, fueled by faster, more aggressive zombies, sudden bursts of violence, and rapid-fire editing. Familiar monstrous creatures return, alongside the terrifying new nemesis, a towering bioengineered nightmare that looks like a mashup of several iconic horror villains. It's grotesque, intimidating, and undeniably striking. In the end, this sequel delivers plenty of noise, bloodshed, and monster mayhem, but falls short of greatness due to sloppy storytelling and weak execution. It's a flawed but occasionally entertaining ride, best suited for fans who know exactly what they're signing up for. Milla Jovovich is clearly in peak physical form, and the film makes full use of it.